Okay, cool. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. I'm Hannah Ekman, the Senior UX Designer at Ceros, and we'll be walking through thinking through UX, which is a really high level, just kind of understanding of what we think of when we talk about UX and some kind of high level principles that you can take and implement into your workflow. So before we kind of jump right into it, if everybody could just write in the chat where they're calling in from today. I know we're all still very segmented with COVID, but if you'll just drop where you're located currently. I'm currently in Denver, Colorado. So if we have any other Coloradans, wow. A lot of East Coast, one California. Howdy from Texas, I love that. Got a few Texas people. Cool, thank you. It's nice to have you all here. We really like these to be kind of informal chats, more kind of small group roundtables rather. So, feel free to throw any questions in the chat as we go, to unmute yourself and chat, and then I'll leave time at the end also for any questions. We should run about kind of 20 minutes today, really high level, and then time to just informally talk. Cool. I will jump right into it. Okay, cool. So what is UX? So I'm sure you've heard 100 different definitions of what UX, and that's sort of by design. It's this really kind of broad topic around, what will resonate with users, what are they looking for, and really thinking about everything through the lens of who your users is, who your users are, and how it affects kind of your product, services, your value, your impact, all of that good stuff. And the three things we really keep top of mind is one, around impact. And when I say impact, I mean the intersection of business value and user value. So for example, when we're talking about doing a piece around lead gen, the business value is really clear there, right? So we're looking to get contacts, get people into a funnel, get them interested in our products and services. But what is the user value? What makes me kind of chomp on the bit to drop my information, learn more, kind of be engaged? And that's really where impact starts to really happen, and where you create, I think, real drive from your user and real engagement. Efficiency. So UX is also kind of a part of working with the team and making sure that everybody is taking kind of that lens of who is the user, what do they care about, and what can we serve up to them. So we do this by making sure that we're aligned at every stage of the project. This also helps us not kind of drop the ball at different stages of understanding, when we get to design, why we made decisions in kind of the content round of what the story was, and we're not kind of misaligned there. So making sure the team is talking, everybody really understands kind of that value portion, and that is continued throughout the project as changes happen or things shift. And the last is really psychology. So how do you kind of influence your users? How do you get them to be really excited to drop their information? And how does that kind of resonate into your entire brand? For example, maybe we're doing a piece around buying home insurance, and the feeling or the psychology that we might want to utilize at first is almost scaring users of, there could be 100 different ways that your home could endure different sort of damages, from lightning to flooding, all of that sort of stuff. And that can be super costly. So we might start off with a little bit of fear, and we might wrap up the piece with kind of trust, credibility, in that our insurance plan covers you no matter what's going on. We have your back. And so that can kind of be a powerful mechanism in getting people to have a certain perception and drive that into impact. And you can think about some of your favorite brands and what kind of emotions or what kind of feelings they invoke for you. Maybe something like Patagonia. I like hiking and being outdoors, and they always give me this feeling of trust and really durable equipment, along with kind of like long-term uses. So their stuff is really expensive. I don't want it to break in 5 minutes. And I also, when I'm cold and camping, I want to make sure that my gear is warm. So thinking about how you kind of bring and invoke emotion in all of your pieces can be really helpful in getting them to take those sort of next actions. Okay, so where to start with any sort of project? Always with context. And my colleagues on strategy, I think, will give really the same song and dance here, but it's really important to understand the context around whatever project or problem that you're solving for. And I often think of this as, how doctors approach patients. Somebody who comes into the ER and they're like, my stomach, it really hurts. Somebody doesn't just hand them Pepto-Bismol, wish them luck, and send them out the door, but they do a kind of a full intake of, where is the pain coming from? How long has it been happening? Is there a family history? And that's the same way we kind of intake projects to understand a lot of these really key things. And the first of which is the goal. So what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? And how do we kind of wrap the whole piece around that? Who is the audience? What is really valuable about this piece? And how does that tie directly back to the goal? What influences them? What excites them? What makes them nervous? All good things to know. And what emotion do we want them to feel as they go through it? And I jumped the gun a little bit there, but and then kind of this middle one is really helpful as well, especially when you have kind of larger content or more difficult content, is to stop and just kind of think about what the key messages are. So what am I trying to relay? I know that my users have the attention span of goldfish and I only have them for a short time. How do I serve up those key messages to them and allow them to kind of dive deeper into the content if they're interested in? How are we measuring success? So, if the goal is lead gen, that's kind of a clear measurement of success. But if the goal is around kind of brand awareness or things like that, what are we going to measure success with? And what are going to be the key metrics that tell us if we are not hitting that? And then emotion, which I touched on a little bit, but what do we want them to feel and why do we want them to feel that? Okay, so this is just kind of a really quick snippet into the creative process that we follow. And, I just want to reiterate that you don't need a UX person on your team. You don't need somebody dedicated to content, design, and build. Everybody's team looks different and everybody's team works a little bit differently. But I just want to talk about a few kind of key considerations that we think about in each of these stages. And we pull them out because they're really hard to think about all at once. And I think the best analogy for this is when if you were looking to build a new bookshelf. You don't just start by kind of cutting the wood and drilling it together, but you start with a planning phase. And that's really the wireframe and content. So what is kind of the blueprints of this piece? What is the logic and structure and how is it going to function? And then what's the story and how are we elevating that? How are we making sure all those questions around context are included in here and make sense? And we're doing it in a fidelity, meaning it's not fully designed out sort of manner, because we want to just quickly kind of sketch it out, figure out what makes sense before we go to design. And that starts to be the time and the time suck of taking a lot more of the project to kind of create this in full full-blown designed out, versus when we can just sketch this and somebody can give us quick feedback on like, hey, this isn't actually right. Can we make a new section here that breaks some of this content out? Super easy to kind of add that in, sketch a new section, make sure it works with the above and the below. So it's a good step to just kind of pause and do some planning. Just like that bookshelf of, you know, what could be really cool for the space versus jumping in and doing our standard bookshelf. Once we get to the design, we start to really get to elevate those blueprints that were set up, really make it kind of come to life, sing with the proper branding, visual assets that really start to, I think, also add that emotional feel to the piece. And then to build where you're adding in really the UI, which is kind of the user interactions, how this is kind of slightly shifting in. As you join the page, they have this nice kind of video header pulling you in and kind of down the page with this big one, making it really easy to kind of digest the content. So, you know, you can see if you started here, it's hard to kind of jump right to the build, and it's good to just segment out each phase of it and think about the planning, the structure, elevating it, the branding, and ultimately adding the interactions that feel really natural and delightful versus kind of distracting and all over the place. Okay, so I think this is arguably the most valuable portion of this chat, which is just some best practices that we always have in our back pockets at every stage of the project. So it doesn't need to just be in wireframe or just be at the end of the design, but these are things that are always really good to keep in mind as you're going through a project. And the first is wayfinding. So wayfinding is all about navigation, how you're keeping people updated, making sure that they can jump to the content that's relevant to them, and they know where they are in the experience. It's helpful in a multitude of ways. One, it kind of gives your user an understanding of what you're going to be talking about in the piece. Two, it allows them to go directly to something that might be more pertinent to them. And three, it sets up the page really nicely to give an understanding of orientation. So if you think about something like a home buyer's journey, you might be on step 3 where you're ready to kind of close, or you might be on step 1 where you're playing with a mortgage calculator and you're not really totally sold into the process. And then it's also something that maybe you could come back to, and maybe you close on the house and there's, you know, all this other stuff that you have to do. So it can be super, super helpful in a lot of different projects. And I actually pulled up a few examples that I think do this in a really nice way. And the first is this Nalco piece. This was kind of a pitch deck that they did for their internal team to just know who they're pitching to and how to kind of pitch to them. And so they created this navigation element here that is really easy to follow. And this can be a great tool, especially with kind of sales decks where, you know, if this was external, you know, we might be talking kind of organically through each of the pieces. But, you know, once I get to the end of it, somebody might want to go back and learn a little bit more about the pitch or have questions. And it allows me to be really prescriptive in navigating as well. And they did a good job kind of chunking it out into different sections. And then this is kind of more of a long scroll piece by a customer called Newzella, and they wanted to talk about making tailor-made content for educational institutions. And they pulled out this really kind of nice nav at the top that easily allows you to kind of jump, but they also repeated it at the end. So you can see if I'm on the philosophy section at the bottom of the page, it logically leads me to how it works. See how it works. And so it gives me a couple different mechanisms to really go through it organically, or I can just kind of pop through it, explore the platform, look at how it works, and jump around at my leisure. Okay, visual clarity. So making sure that you're using a standard set of colors and points of interactions for the experience. You can see on the right side, your eye just starts to kind of bounce around, trying to sort of have your brain understand what the organizational structure is here of why is body text bold and really dark versus subhead, which is super light, and why the color palette isn't following kind of a logical dark to light. Versus on the left, it's a really clear understanding, and this helps your user understand where those headings are, what the main topics are, and kind of dive in deeper from there, and keep a really kind of clear structure in terms of what's most important. So on pages where you might have a long scroll, you want to give your highest contrast to your CTA button because you want your users to be drawn to it, versus something like your back to top button. You don't want that to be super dark, to be kind of animating and drawing all your attention there, because that's not kind of the key element on the page. I want them to really digest the content and then kind of take the actionable item when they're ready. Signifiers. So this is all about kind of the physical characteristic of different sort of interaction points. On the right side, you can see there's not really a clear understanding of why there's differences between these, especially kind of like the link up front. Why is this bolded and outlined versus kind of square and sentence case? You want to make sure it's really clear what the primary action is, what you want them or your users to do. As you add links and links, you create a little bit of user paralysis of like, I don't know really what I'm supposed to be doing after digesting this. Am I supposed to contact them, learn more, fill out a form? So making it really clear what that key thing you want them to kind of take the next step on is. And then you can have things like secondary links. Maybe you have a blog post and it's really top of the funnel where people aren't ready to totally engage with contacting you, but maybe learning a little bit more. So setting up a clear system and a clear hierarchy for them to understand helps them kind of focus on the content of what I'm supposed to be doing, what you're discussing in the piece. And then the second is around different interaction points and making sure that's clear. We want to give kind of a really standard set of buttons that people know what's interactive. We've all been on that website where there's different things that you can interact with, but you're not sure what those are. And so you're kind of clicking all around and it becomes more of playing than actual digesting. On this side, I'm not really sure why this is filled in. This one's outlined and this one has no bounding box. So making it really clear what your interactions are and how you use them can be really helpful for your users to successfully engage with your piece and not be confused about how to engage with your piece. And then I also have some examples here. This was a really great one that GE did quite some time ago, but still really relevant. They have kind of these nice arrows in here. They have kind of this status bar as well. And it really walks me through this engine. I'm getting an update here that there's a state change and an update here. And then I can also just kind of prescriptively do it as well. So again, just constant feedback mechanisms that I'm properly using the interactions. They have these really cool, satisfying kind of hovers here. So really nice, just clean interactions. This one has a little bit of a shadow behind it, making it clear which one I'm on. It's a really nice piece. And then this one we did with Spencer Stewart, all about how kind of the media and the future of media leadership is changing. They used plus buttons throughout, again, giving people a few ways to interact and engage with the content. So instead of having to open, close, we added kind of a carousel here where you can kind of learn about each of them, or again, kind of click on the one that is most interesting to you. Again, kind of the plus buttons. We also added some instructional text. This one was a little bit light just because the likelihood that you moused over this within this container was pretty high, but adding instructional text can also be really helpful. This was a cool little call out that I think speaks to kind of the key messages. We were just given a list of different people and where they had transferred from one company to the next. So Roger Lynch from Pandora to Condé Nast. And so a huge list of these, I think 3 pages long. And the key message there wasn't to have you understand who Sheila is and why she transferred, but to show you that the system was quite complex and people weren't just staying in advertising or PR, but there was a lot of cross-pollination. And so this was kind of a nice way that we got to show how people are kind of changing from different, BBC Worldwide to the New York Times, and then a little bit of a moment where you just kind of get to explore that, but understand, again, the key message here is cross-pollination. So yeah, they did another kind of secondary sort of text or instructional text. Just some really nice interactions here. You can see this is kind of that secondary CTA, and here's kind of our main one here. So nice interactions here and good use of signifiers. Okay, hierarchy. Having kind of a really just strong hierarchy can help your users digest what those key messages are. So making sure that there's not a lot of content just being lost in tons of just paragraphs, but how do we pull it out and siphon up those kind of key parts? So for example, maybe we're talking about how productive people are in the work from home environment. And maybe we have kind of a chart here that says 67% actually identify as being far more productive in a work from home setting than in an office. And that's the key message I want you to have, is that actually the majority do feel like they're more productive. Is going back to a workplace the right move for your company? And then maybe you have different kind of elements where you can engage with who was that 65% demographic and who was the opposing 67 and why do they feel that way? So giving that key message and allowing people to kind of dive in deeper versus just having everything on the page at once starts to lose its resonance. Readability, so making sure text sizes are legible. You don't have Zoolander size body text that's unreadable, or light gray on a white background where it gets a little bit harder to read that based on contrast. And the last one is really around control. So, there's no wrong answer here. I think just thinking about what level of control you want to exercise in your piece and why you might be exercising that. For example, that this first piece that I showed you, you might need to understand this first kind of piece, the pitch, the personas, to understand the key features. So maybe I'll set this up in a paginated way. Again, sales decks are really a good example here of, you might need the context of the first 4 slides to understand our products and services, or whatever kind of the next slides are. So how do you set that up in a clear way to kind of sequentially get there? I always think of something like playing Mario as a kid, that you have different levels and you're learning new skills, you're learning different ways to interact with the game. So going from level 1 to level 60 would seem impossible just because I don't know all the controls, versus kind of they walk you through that and you kind of gain your knowledge as you interact with the game and as you go through levels. It can also be similar to a quiz where you want them to maybe they don't need to answer all the questions, or maybe they do need to answer all the questions in order to get kind of specific results. So setting that up with a little bit of control can help them kind of push it through and get to that results page. Or you might have something that's more like a diversity report, where you don't need to understand the information in the first 3 sections to understand the rest of it. Sort of like an episode of Friends, you can kind of jump back in. So there can also be a combination of this as well. Maybe you have a little bit of information and then you might kind of quiz people on, did they kind of get a lot from this information, or from this information, where did they kind of stand in this topic? So lots of different ways to set it up, but just thinking about what your user might be confused about if they don't know, or what can be really kind of organic and they can kind of just flow through it. Awesome. That is all I had for you today. Again, I'll stop and share my screen, and we can pull up the chat. If there are any questions, feel free to go off mute as well if you have any questions. So I will pause and let any kind of questions come up. Okay. If you do find that you do have any questions or anything arises, don't be afraid to reach out to your CSM. I'm always happy to, talk more in depth when you have a project of, we're dealing with this section, not really sure how to approach it. Anything like that, I'm always happy to kind of chat further. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all so much for joining today. I hope you have a lovely rest of your Tuesday. Cheers. Yes, Stuart, a recording will be sent out later today in a follow-up. No problem. Cheers, guys.